Okay, so I would like to blow the lid off what has been a long-term ongoing dispute and what I would call ostracization of myself within my family, not even my friend group network, but the family thing isolated me enough to feel the same thing within my friend group network. So, as many people are aware, I've been suffering long-term chronic pain and stiffness issues due to a severe accident I encountered 10 years ago in California, where I smashed my cuboid bone foot, broke my pelvis in two places, and cut all the tendons in my left hand. Returning to Ireland, I received minimal amounts of physiotherapy on my hand, which had the 6 tendons lacerated, 3 nerves, and interarticular fracture, which I received while undergoing a master's degree that I started just 4 weeks after falling off said 50-foot cliff. At, During that time, I received zero physiotherapy or otherwise occupational treatment for my other injuries, being my broken pelvis and broken foot. And I just got on with life, completing this master's degree with the highest results I had achieved while smoking cannabis every day to manage my pain levels. From there, I undertook a career in process and instrumentation design, initially working for a company called CDGA in Cork, completing some designs for BASF and Pepsi plants internationally, and then continuing consulting for that CDGA company and in a Glanbia milk drying plant in Waterford, Bellevue Port. I then accepted a role with Glendimplex as a renewable development engineer, where I worked for 8 months living in Belfast. I had a Belgian girl who I brought then to the United States after I was offered a job in a semiconductor plant in upstate New York as a commissioning and operations engineer slash technician in the building phase of this $5 billion semiconductor plant, where I had to walk for an average of 2 hours per day up and down stairs on my damaged foot with hard boots, which had a significant degrading impact on the quality of my foot and my gait. Again, receiving zero physical therapy treatment whatsoever. After a bad breakup with this Belgian girl, I then took 6 weeks off and was strongly advised by my parents to not live my life, and they asked me not to take a sabbatical and spend time in Colombia, which I did and had a great time and great experience. I then was offered a wonderful role in a company in the United Kingdom working under Martello Limited, owned by Martin Kelly, where I administered ERP contracting consulting services for integrated business systems in the transition of large company software and manufacturing automated systems. After 1 year, the initial phase of the project was completed, but there was a clear demand for my skills in the role, where I created my own business and worked as a consultant for a little more than a year. The rate that I had at the time began as £300 per day and upgraded to £400 per day at the end of my employment or my consulting contract at that location, at which point we terminated, and it was whichever phase had been completed. I then undertook another role after spending a number of weeks in Thailand on another little break, enjoying scuba diving and some other activities, and I began consulting for a company in Waterford, a small town called Cappoquin, in a business called CIL Precision, who mainly produced high precision steel and fabrication works for the medical and semiconductor industries, with their largest customer being Siemens Healthcare and the largest product being blood analyzer kits. I worked there for 1 year and was contacted again to initiate another project for a company owned by the largest company in Ireland, CRH, the company being Cubis Systems Limited. And then I, in similar guise of consulting, undertook a large data responsibility role for maintaining all of the data across multiple sites of this large integrated business, which encompasses all of the data and required information to manage and control the entire business, which was highly stressful. At this point, the injuries that I had encountered were reaching a critical point where the commuting and desk sitting without any treatment and provision for relaxation modes meant that my mental state deteriorated, and one day I had to leave work because I wasn't able to manage my mental state because of the pain that I had been in. I then began working almost entirely remotely. At such a point, I couldn't really focus on work, and as I had feelings that I had essentially a long-term undiagnosed ADHD condition where I have attention disorder or hyperactivity, more like it, I, on my own steam, found and administered myself what is the only prescribed solution to such woes, which is a very commonly prescribed drug called modafinil, an alternative to Adderall and Ritalin, which are also used to treat such conditions in an attempt to improve my focus in work. When I administered this to myself, my focus somewhat improved, but actually in the realm of personal care, and that is what led my focus away from work, and I found it very difficult not to focus solely on trying to heal my personal physical injuries. I found myself spending an untold number of hours every day stretching and doing yoga and breath work in attempts to alleviate my extreme physical chronic pains. At this point, I moved apartment where I had been staying in a house in Sandymount area in Dublin. I moved in with a friend who was living in the Smithfield area, and there was some turbulence in time where our lifestyles were somewhat different, and I was taking a lot of this work home. The data role was highly stressful because it encompassed so many shareholders, and the infrastructure and capabilities and requirements for completing it were highly stressful and intricate, with hundreds of various different files and version control being required to maintain the integrity of the entire business system for this large corporation, which had multiple sites throughout the world. At this point, I had a falling out with my housemate as I was trying to do work late in the night, and he initiated parties and having people over, which I shouldn't have had to have my work carry so late into the night, but I found it difficult to focus and complete what was being required in a reasonable time frame during the day. There was an altercation where myself and my roommate had a fight, and there was some threatening behaviour. And I left the apartment just 1 week after moving in. And at this point, the roommate, who knew and had knowledge of my brother, called my brother and told him that I was going crazy and that I'd been taking all of these drugs, which were, again, this standard prescription modafinil. I think it's called a isotropic or a um, anyway, treatment for ADHD. So this got filtered from my brother to my family without him ever contacting me or wondering what the problem was from my end or what was going on. And next thing, the whole family started a form of intervention, assuming that I was under some form of a crazy scenario and XYZ, despite, may I add, the fact that my level of employment and responsibility is far greater than the brother who was accusing me of these things. Not that that might be relevant. And along this time, I found myself experimenting with psilocybin magic mushrooms, mostly in a microdose form, which I found to be highly therapeutic, as would medical journal studies in the past number of years have been showing to be true. And I had highly beneficial experiences with microdosing in such substances. My family was extremely non-supportive and accusational, and essentially this caused a massive rift within my family structure, and the trust levels between myself and my family deteriorated rapidly, where nothing I could say would be believed by my family members. My focus on my healthcare became overwhelming to the point where I couldn't maintain my working life. And at the end of the first phase of this implementation project, I bowed out of the project. And around that time, which was January, I believe, 2020 or 2021, I elected to take time off and to go to Mexico, where services were open and I could avail of physiotherapy and acupuncture and other services, as all of these were closed in Ireland due to COVID. The skepticism and, I suppose, doubts in my approach and in my own mental well-being continued despite very little actual contact and communication between myself and my family. I found there was a massive amount of hearsay and discussion and gossip about my life behind my back, and I became more and more ostracized from my family life. At one point, I attempted to have magic mushrooms sent to my parents' house in Dublin, where my sister was residing, from a legal source in Holland, which were intercepted and caused further intervention by my family, where I was trying to explain that this was actually having such a massive level of positive improvement on my physical and mental well-being, because the level of chronic pain I was experiencing had led me to become suicidal, again due to having had zero level of physical or mental care whatsoever since the outset of my accident, which was 7 years ago at this time. On my return from Mexico, I was in a much better place. I had spent quite a great deal of time engaging in healthy and fun activities where I had a new lease of life, where previously I didn't expect to grow old in any form of healthy shape. I had now physically, demonstrably found myself in much better shape, and in fact had developed the ability to run, which is something I never thought I would be able to do again. All of this at enormous levels of physical and mental strain and determination, levels that I had never demonstrated in any other aspect of my life before. The pain continued, and I found that actually returning to my family members caused relapse in pain and in physical and emotional conditions, because they still treated me in an ostracized manner with no trust levels and acted as if I was a drug addict. I should add that I have been a long-term cannabis user long before any of my accident, but since the accident my use continued and strengthened, as it were. As a tidbit, the highest level of consumption I ever had of marijuana was within the first year after my accident, while I underwent this master's degree in engineering, initially beginning it still on a Zimmer frame or a walker, which was incredibly stressful and strenuous to undertake. I should add that in this master's I achieved the best results I had ever achieved in university, being just shy of a first-class honours degree despite missing a number of lectures and being unable to hand in a certain number of course documents. So this had not been affecting my mental health up until any point, and I was trying to explain to these people that were accusing me of drug addiction and its effect on my well-being. I was trying to explain that it was the chronic pain that was affecting my outlook on life. Shortly after my return from Mexico, I decided to undertake an offer for a further engineering consulting project with a business also in Waterford City for a company called... It's actually escaping me now. A company that produced high purity gas valves for the semiconductor industry, and the role was similar to ones that I had undertaken previously. At this time, my father again accused me of being on drugs all the time, because I had normally been in pain and I arrived at the house in good mood and condition, even though at this point I was maximizing the level of efforts to dispel my pain and nervous system's problems by using cold shock therapy, where every morning I would arise at 6 a.m. and I would actually swim in the sea, even in November coldness in Ireland, which I found to have a somewhat positive effect on my nervous system. I was undertaking breathwork and other efforts to try and prevent what had been a completely unbearable level of pain, where sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night screaming for hours. And my father then accused me of being on drugs at this point, after I had spent probably 3 hours in cold shock therapy, at which point I freaked out and became completely irate, shouting at my father, saying, "What can I do? What do I need to do to prove to you that I am not on drugs? What can I possibly do? Because you never seem to believe me. There's nothing I can seem to do that can make you genuinely believe me." I then went and bought a drugs test kit, in an effort to prove that I had not been on drugs for a number of weeks. And I'm saying drugs, but I mean cannabis, which is now recreationally legal in most states. In the United States, for example, which is why it ever became illegal in Ireland, because we followed their suit, let alone the legality of its use in medical applications, which is exactly what my application was. And at this point, my father refused to even look at the result of such a test. So I threw the results at him as he closed the door behind me and locked me out of the house. At this point, then, eventually, with fewer options, my pain continuing and my mental state not allowing me to continue the level of professionalism that are required for the role that I undertake as a high-profile engineering consultant, I bowed out of this project as well and sold my car and moved to Italy, then Portugal, to buy a camper van in an attempt to spend more time engaging in yoga and other healthcare activities to alleviate what have still been long-standing injuries. I should add that within this time I was paying very high levels of medical insurance, and I gained some scans from the medical industry, but there was no actual treatment or help that was offered. And the positive impacts that I have had and demonstrated beyond what was ever deemed or presented to me as being possible were all self-directed, and so I have been extremely frustrated with my life, with my family, and with the amount of gossip that has been undergoing. At the same time, my family was so concerned about my mental health. I would say that it's in the form of a sarcastic quote, because I tried to explain the entire time that the reason for my, call it, not stable mental health was that I had been suffering chronic pain, yet they didn't seem to really care as much about that as having me be analysed by a psychiatrist, at which point my cousin, who is my GP, sent a, let's just call it, not ideal initiation letter to a confidential psychiatrist if the intention was to go about having an open and safe space to be able to rationally analyze any potential woes. She divulged personal family information which would not have been relevant if my GP was not a family member, which was unprofessional. This, along with a large network of discussion about my case behind my back, only further isolated me from my family network. And I currently now sit or lay in a hospital after being assaulted here in Lisbon and badly breaking the same leg that I broke 10 years ago on falling off that cliff, where once again my father accused me of being on drugs, even though, again, not that I even care anymore, and I made this abundantly clear because it's a medication. I haven't been for weeks and weeks and have been using my same techniques. And so my frustration and the level of hurt and I'm trying to think of the correct word here. A level of hurt and a level of isolation. No, it's a level of betrayal that I've been experiencing for now a number of years, and yet somehow I persevered despite now spending all of my savings where I should have received a large payout from the negligent property management of the location that I fell from that cliff in the garden of a building in Isla Vista in California 10 years ago. And so this is my life. This is a description of what has left me in my position and how my well-to-do family have treated me in these scenarios.